The emergency klaxons screamed through Outpost Theta 7 as the structural supports groaned under the weight of cascading failures. Darren Cole sprinted down the corridor, his boots pounding against metal grating that vibrated with each explosion from the lower decks. The mining station was tearing itself apart, victim to a catastrophic reactor leak that had triggered a chain reaction no one had anticipated. "All personnel, evacuate immediately!" The automated voice echoed through the chaos, barely audible over the screech of tearing metal and the hiss of venting atmosphere. Darren had been in the Commerce District when the first explosion hit. As a civilian contractor, he had no official evacuation priority, no assigned escape pod. But that didn't matter now. What mattered was the sound he'd heard 3 corridors back. High-pitched whimpering coming from a residential section that was being systematically sealed off by emergency bulkheads. He doubled back, his lungs burning as smoke began filling the passageways. The Crithian residential block was supposed to be empty. The proud warrior race had evacuated their families first, as was their custom. But as Darren reached the sealed entrance, he heard it again. The unmistakable cry of younglings in distress. The bulkhead was locked, red warning lights flashing across its surface. Through the reinforced window, Darren could see 3 small figures huddled in the corner. Crithian cubs, their gray-scaled bodies trembling, their large amber eyes wide with terror. They couldn't have been more than 5 standard years old. Darren's hands flew to the manual override panel. Sparks flew as he pried off the cover and began rewiring the mechanism. Every instinct screamed at him to run, to find his own way off this dying station. The rational part of his brain calculated his survival odds dropping with each passing second. But he'd seen enough wars, enough death. He'd lost his own daughter to the Syndicate raids 7 years ago. These cubs weren't going to die alone, and afraid if he could help it. The bulkhead hissed and groaned, sliding open just enough for Darren to squeeze through. The cubs scattered, pressing themselves against the far wall. Crithians were raised to be warriors from birth, taught that humans were weak, untrustworthy creatures who relied on technology rather than honor. "Easy, easy," Darren said softly, approaching with his hands raised. "I'm getting you out of here." The largest cub, a female with distinctive silver markings, bared her small fangs. "Stay back, human. We are Crithian. We do not need your help." Another explosion rocked the station. The floor tilted dangerously and all 3 cubs tumbled forward. Darren caught them instinctively, pulling them close as debris rained down from the buckling ceiling. A support beam crashed where they'd been standing seconds before. The cubs were heavier than human children, their dense musculature already developing despite their youth. But Darren didn't hesitate. He scooped up the smallest 2 under his arms and grabbed the silver-marked female by the hand. "We can argue about Crithian pride later," he grunted. "Right now we run." He pulled them back through the bulkhead opening just as another section of ceiling collapsed. The station's tilting grew worse. They were on a lower deck that was beginning to separate from the main structure. Darren's mind raced through the station's layout. The main evacuation bays were too far, already sealed off. But there was a maintenance shuttle bay 2 sections over, used by repair crews. The cubs struggled to keep pace as Darren half-dragged, half-carried them through the disintegrating corridors. His shoulders screamed in protest, his augmented knee, a souvenir from the border wars, threatening to give out. But he pushed harder, diving through doorways seconds before they sealed, leaping over gaps where the floor had torn away. "Almost there!" he shouted over the roar of escaping atmosphere. The maintenance bay doors were closing when they arrived. Darren saw the gap shrinking and made a split-second decision. He lifted all 3 cubs, 1 under each arm and the 3rd pressed against his chest, and threw himself forward in a desperate slide. They shot through the gap with centimeters to spare, tumbling into the bay in a tangle of limbs. Behind them, the doors sealed with a final, decisive clang. A single maintenance shuttle sat in its berth, emergency lights blinking. Darren practically threw the cubs into the passenger compartment before collapsing into the pilot's seat. His hands moved on autopilot, initiating the launch sequence even as the bay's external hull began to crack. The shuttle launched into the void just as Outpost Theta 7 broke apart behind them, a flower of flame and debris expanding in the darkness. Darren set course for the nearest rescue beacon and only then allowed himself to slump in his seat, every muscle trembling with exhaustion. Behind him, the three cubs huddled together in silence. 3 hours later, aboard the rescue vessel Vigilant Dawn, Darren sat in the medical bay while a technician treated his burns and lacerations. He'd refused treatment until the cubs were examined first, earning strange looks from the medical staff. The door hissed open, and two Crithian warriors entered. They were massive, easily 7 feet tall, their scaled armor gleaming even under the harsh medical lighting. Their amber eyes, so like the cubs, fixed on Darren with an intensity that would have made most humans flee. Ravax, the male warrior whose clan markings identified him as a battlemaster, approached slowly. His mate stood beside him, her hand resting on her plasma pistol. They had every reason to be suspicious. Humans and Crythians had been enemies for generations. The peace treaty was barely 3 years old. "You saved our younglings," Ravax said, his voice a deep rumble. It wasn't a question. Darren met his gaze steadily. "They were in danger. Anyone would have—" "No," Ravax interrupted, shaking his massive head. "Not anyone. The evacuation reports show 73 personnel left them behind. Security footage shows you went back, through sealed bulkheads, while the station was dying around you." The female warrior stepped forward. "You carried all three. Our cubs are not light, even for our kind. A human should not have been able to—" "Adrenaline," Darren said simply, "and stubbornness." Ravax was silent for a long moment. Then slowly, deliberately, he placed his clawed hand over his chest in the Crithian gesture of profound respect, one Darren had only ever seen exchanged between warriors of the highest honor. "We were taught humans were weak," Ravax said quietly, "that you valued your own lives above all else, that you would abandon cubs, the old, the wounded, to save yourselves." He glanced at his mate, something unreadable passing between them. "We reconsidered everything we were taught about your kind today." His mate nodded. "You have our life debt, Darren Cole, and the life debt of Clan Ravax is not given lightly." Darren felt something shift in that moment, not just in the room, but in something larger, in the cold calculations of war and peace, in the assumptions that had guided two species toward mutual destruction for so long. "I just did what was right," he said. Ravax's lips pulled back, revealing rows of sharp teeth, but his eyes crinkled in what Darren realized was a smile. "Yes," the warrior said, "you did, and perhaps that is what we needed to see. Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses,